Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the High Line. My name is Alan van Capelle. I'm the Executive Director of Friends of the High Line, and it is absolutely my pleasure to welcome you this evening. I cannot remember another fall evening that felt or looked just like this. You could smell the air from Canada coming in. If you look this way, it's crisp and piney. And if you look down there, you could see the blue sky peeking out with these beautiful cotton ball-like clouds, and the leaves on the trees are just magnificent right now, and the gardens look lovely. I walked the park twice today, and today is rather a big deal for us because Piet Oudolf is here. The man, the vision, is here. And we are so grateful to every single person who had a hand in making this evening so special. A particular thank you to the Consulate of the Netherlands in New York for sponsoring this event. And they have been absolutely magnificent to work with. And before we begin with our panel, I would like to welcome the cultural attaché from the Press and Cultural Affairs Department of the Consulate General of the Netherlands in New York, Pauline Gené.
You nailed it. Dank je wel. You want me to sit or stand? What shall I do? Stand? Yeah? Okay. Thank you, Alan, for your kind introduction, and good evening, everyone. A special greeting also from my mom to Mr. Oudolf, pioneer of the new perennial movement. We're so happy and honored to have you with us today. My name is Pauline Gené. You got it right. And I'm just a little over a month into my new role as head of the Cultural Affairs team of the Kingdom of the Netherlands in the United States. That sounds official, doesn't it? We're based here in New York. I'm totally loving it because the city has so much to offer, not in the least this unique and amazing park. I should have 3 hands. 25 years ago, I apologize that I sat down anyways, I also lived in New York. And then the High Line was merely a wild idea by a couple of friends, or maybe even not that. And today we have this incredible park. An urban public space as no other. And today we can hardly imagine New York without it. This summer, we celebrated the 15th birthday of the opening of the first phase of the High Line, with all kinds of wonderful events, including the Wild by Design 2009 celebration of Mr. Piet Oudolf's 4-season naturalistic garden design, inspired by the natural landscape that grew wild here before the park opened to the public. And I wish to congratulate Mr. Oudolf and the Friends of the High Line for reaching this wonderful milestone. But of course, as we all know, as Mr. Oudolf taught us, a garden is never done. Anyone who has a garden, now that I live in New York, of course I have none, but back in Amsterdam I did have a tiny one, knows that. Fortunately, this park has so much future while honoring the past. I'm struggling with my papers. This year, the Kingdom of the Netherlands and many partners in New York State and City are marking 400 years of shared history. I love that New York sound. As part of our Future 400 program. The annual Horticulture celebration on the High Line exemplifies the incredible results that can be achieved when people from all walks of life come together with a shared goal. and the intention to create a better, healthier, and prettier city for all to enjoy. And we are so proud of Mr. Piet Oudolf's recognition as one of the co-creators, and we're excited to see how the High Line will continue to evolve. Last June, my colleagues were referring to it, I wasn't here then yet. The High Line graciously welcomed our King and Queen. It was quite a thing, wasn't it, Robert? During their visit, they saw with their own eyes how successful adaptive reuse can be achieved in a dense urban setting. And they saw that successful public spaces have a pivotal role in creating connected, healthy neighborhoods and cities. And they saw that small grassroots urban planning plans can grow into large-scale projects with the help of ongoing community engagement, collaboration, and co-creation on all levels. Dear Alan, Piet, if I may, and everyone involved, thank you for creating this invaluable space. I think you've succeeded in creating a better future for all. And I look forward to listening to your conversation and also to visiting this High Line many times during my posting here in New York. I got 5 more years to go. Together with my family and friends, including my son, who's 20, who's studying to become an urban planner in the Netherlands. And yesterday he told me the High Line is on the top of his list. Thank you.
Thank you, Pauline, and thank you again to the consulate for all of your support. It means a tremendous amount to us, and please tell your son that he is not alone in wanting to come to the High Line, because this year, according to the numbers we saw last weekend, we are expecting to end the year with 7 million visitors to the High Line. A park that was designed for 350,000 people. So let's get started. I'm excited and thrilled to introduce to you Piet Oudolf to this audience. The High Line would not be the High Line without Piet's vision. The design of a 4-season naturalistic garden transformed the High Line into an iconic New York treasure. And the success of the High Line helped champion these ideas to the world, globally influencing how cities everywhere now develop green space. Piet is also a prolific author. Could you hold up his books for me, please? Thank you. His most recent work, Piet Oudolf at Home, from Hayden Press, is an exhaustive exploration into Piet's creative process. I mean, do you sleep? Do you ever sleep?
No, I don't write books, but
and it's filled with these gorgeous, gorgeous images. And you can find a link to the book on the membership table outside. And we're excited to announce that Piet will be helping us to create the new 34th Street entrance garden as part of the Western Rail Yard renovations scheduled to take place next year. Thank you for making the long trip to be with us. We're delighted, and we're also delighted that you're here also to celebrate your birthday with us. So happy birthday as well. Now, Richard Hayden is our Senior Director of Horticulture. He joined the High Line in April of 2022. And this is really a very tough job because Piet designs it, he plants it, and then Richard has to keep it looking the way Piet had intended to. And when the gardens were designed, remember, these buildings weren't all here. We didn't know what would happen. And so Richard and his unbelievably talented team of horticulturalists and the volunteers that help them are charged with taking Piet's vision and maintaining it for today. Richard has been an excellent Highline ambassador, helping to elevate the nature of the Highline horticulture, creating engaging and interpretive content for our many visitors and passionate gardeners from across the New York region. We'd also like to, so thank you, Richard. And we'd also like to welcome Ngoc Minh Ngo. Ngoc is a very talented and prolific New York-based photographer whose works explore the intrinsic beauty of plants and nature. Her images have been published in many international publications, and she is the author and photographer of 3 books, the most recent, New York Green, Discovering the City's Most Treasured Parks and Gardens. It is fantastic if you haven't gotten it. And also, if you're interested in that book, more information can be found on the code at the membership table as well. It is really lovely. And so, with that, let our conversation begin.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. I'm very honored today to be talking to Piet about his work on the Highline. And before we start, I just want to say a few words. Be careful. We don't want you to fall off. I just want to say a few words to give us some context. Robert Hammond, one of the founders of the Highline, once said that the Highline could be our generation's Central Park. And this is true for a number of reasons, but the most important reason, I think, is what the Highline says about our relationship to nature in the city. You see, in the 19th century, New York City was very polluted, highly industrialized, and it's a place where nature had been banished. So when Olmsted and Vox designed Central Park, their intention was to give the people an escape into the country from the city. Whereas the Highline, we are given nature without the illusion of being in the country. And this is a huge seismic change. In the sense, the park embodies this 21st century ideal of what a city can be, and that is the urban and the pastoral are no longer mutually exclusive, and the Highline celebrates nature as an integral part of the city. And like many New Yorkers, I first came across the Highline through the photographs of Joel Sternfeld. And they were published in an article in the New Yorker magazine written by Adam Gopnik, who quoted Sternfeld. And he said, "I just pray that if they save the Highline, they'll save some of the virgin parts so that people can have this kind of hallucinatory experience of nature in the city." And although it was impossible to save the Highline as it was exactly, what Piet has done is he has kept that spirit of that wild landscape for us to this day. So Piet's work has been described as art, and in that sense, I see the Highline as a multi-dimensional work of art. It is a tapestry of incredible richness in textures and forms and colors that moves through time, through the seasons, and through the changes in climatic conditions. The Highline is an aesthetic, and as Piet says, emotional, but I would also add intellectual experience all at once. The beautiful plantings are a joy to behold, smell, and delight in. But they also inspire meditations on time and nature, ecology, the human creative impulse. As Piet has often said, and this is something that is important to keep in mind, the High Line is not wild nature, but it satisfies our longing for the wild. And at the same time, it teaches us what we ourselves can do in our own gardens. So in this way, Piet has expanded not only our plant vocabulary, but also our perspective and understanding what is beautiful in nature. So with that, I'd like to begin our talk with the idea that the wildness in your work actually belies a precision and a depth of knowledge of plant communities that you cultivated over decades. So you've really literally transformed our landscape, not only through your work on the public parks that you've done around the world, but also through the influence that your work has had in landscape design and gardening. And so I'd like to take this opportunity to explore the different aspects of you as a plantsman, a garden designer, a public educator, and an artist. And so to begin, can you tell us a little bit about how you became interested in plants and your trajectory from owning a nursery in the Netherlands to making gardens all over the world? And I have some pictures to accompany.
Oh, yeah, that's a picture not working, you know. But you see the work, the things behind that. That's the real work. That you know, and this was just a picture made for a magazine, which I think looks good, but doesn't say anything about what my intention of what I do. But how we started in the early 80s, coming from a city of Haarlem, being a sort of self-made garden builder, maker. I had a license to make gardens, but my interest was more into plants. So I made gardens and was not a good designer at that time, but plants were my biggest sort of tool to create gardens at that time. And already when I lived in Haarlem, we made gardens that were small, but plants were the sort of main thing that people how would you say that? That made the garden, so to say. It was not the design. But at a certain time, I thought I need more space. So we sold our house and we bought a piece of land and a derelict farmhouse in the eastern part of the Netherlands. And we started a nursery, and I never realized that was so much work, you know. So we had no clients. I had just a little bit of money left and a mortgage to start, but we built a nursery by my own hands. So my wife, she supported me all the time. So every time I said, shall we do this? She said, yeah, if you think you have to do it, just do it. So the move to Hummelo was also it was my idea, but she always said, yes, if you think you do it. But here it was. So we had this nursery. It's a very long story, you know. We have made a book about it this thick, but but I can tell you that the nursery became a success. I was interested in plants that were not over-decorated, plants that looked more natural, plants that you couldn't find in nurseries at that time. So we collected plants from all over Europe. We were inspired by the plants that Mien Ruijs used at that time. You know, that was also not her design was an inspiration, because I didn't feel that I was a real good designer at that time. Structurally, let's say hard landscaping. But the plants were interesting because they were robust, they were tall, they had power, they had character, they had a sort of personality. I thought that is, and at that time, most of the plants that were used in gardens were alpine plants, small. Rock garden plants and real perennial plants were a sort of on the lowest degree of garden. There was trees, shrubs, and then, yeah, the perennials somewhere, if you like them, but trees, shrubs, roses, and all mostly decorative plants. And if you, so the second year we started to, you were too quick.
Sorry.
So the second year we started to create open days. We invited nurserymen from all over the Netherlands to come to our place to sell their plants. They were all specialized. There were maybe 3-4 people specialized in more than just the average plant. Tree and shrub nurseries, people that could sell books about plants, antique books. So we had a sort of number of people that were interesting for people with gardening, that people that were not just home gardeners, but people that really were interested in plants. So it became so busy. And I think the former picture, the earlier picture showed that. You saw it was busy. So that created our income at that time. So designing was not happening anymore. We had to work to propagate plants. We had a good number of clients that came regularly. So that is the start of everything. And the love of plant never declined, you know, never got less, only become more. And you can...
And you worked with a lot of other plant people. You went to different places to study them, to study different plant communities in different places.
You know, I never called it studying, because I just wanted to go to places where you could see plants in the wild. So we had friends, like on the right-hand side you see some friends of mine. We went into the mountains of Eastern Europe, and also later in North America. This is Texas, for instance, yeah. So it's nice to see plants in their own habitat, and I think you learn a lot of that. And I think this is in Croatia, 1991. We dug out hellebores there because people burned their fields, and you learned a lot. Also, certainly because you know where plants grow. And I think it was next to the busy life we had. The traveling was just occasionally with friends. Texas again, yeah. North America, that's Texas on the right-hand side. But you see, looking at plants at the place where they grow is essential for I think, your future work in design, with, especially with plants. And so, yeah, that is Pennsylvania, viaduct reading. You know, it is wild, you know, that's really wild. It is how the High Line is still at a certain part at the end, you know. But I met friends, like you see here, Henk Gerritsen, and Henk Gerritsen was someone who was a person that came from from native plantings. But he also became very interested in the plants that we were growing, because he traveled all over, not only Europe, but also further away, Iran, and so. And he recognized plants that he saw on his travels at our nursery. So we became friends. And at that time, I started to wonder, because I was really interested in English gardens, you know, all the gardens we knew from magazines, and I still loved them, but I found them sometimes too rigid, too sort of momental for the moment, and also rather dogmatic. You know, there were a lot of rules. You had books and calendars that told you what to do for instance, in January. There was a whole list what to do in February, March, and so on. And I looked for more spontaneity, and talking with Henk at that time became a sort of revelation for me, sort of that I thought, okay, we can do that. So we started to work with in a different way. We started to look at plants as personalities more, as characters. We looked at a plant after flowering, that seed heads could be interesting. Dead stems and dead remains could be nice. How plants emerge from the ground when they come up just without even flowers could be interesting. So we looked more than just for flowers at that time. And that was quite new, you know. There's not many people that did that. And I just did it because I felt at a certain point, I just did it, you know. And we also built borders, you know, places in the garden where people could see what were the combinations of plants that we put together. And that attracted people. And also people didn't really understand it, but they liked it. You know, they didn't do it at home, but they loved to see it at our place, and that is sort of kind how it all started.
Yeah. Other people.
Yeah, we met a lot of people in the garden world. You know, so that is also part of the story. So many people we visited came also to our house to visit it. We had lectures at home. We had days that we invited people to come over to tell about their gardens, about their story. And I think that, so it became more and more. And our gardens, at a certain point, we got the question, can you do our garden? Can you just, it's not designing the garden, but can you do a planting design? Right. Can you do this? And a planting design at that time was not put on paper. We made a list of plants that we like to use, and just we went to the garden with a number of plants of each species, and we just put the garden together in that you know, in that place.
So
that's my wife. My first book. The first book came because our plants were so interesting that the publisher asked, there was a publisher that asked if we could do a book about our plants, you know, because the plants were so special, and he thought it was quite strange that a nursery could do a book about their plants by a publisher, because normally it doesn't bring any money for the publisher, only for the grower, yeah? If he can publish a book. So. And that book was called, we did it together with Henk Harrison, which you saw, the guy that was more into wild plantings. We made a book that was called Dream Plants, a new generation of garden plants. And the word dream plants, dream house, and dream whatever is so common nowadays, but at that time the publisher said, we cannot use the word dream. You know, I can't sell that. that was our first book. That was the start, and that, yeah. Can I go on with the story? So, so that book was discovered by by people from the Swedish University in Lund, and they brought it over to Sweden. It was translated into Swedish, and I think that started a whole new sort of way for me in gardening, because going from private gardens and doing small plantings for clients, I certainly got a question if I could do a garden in Enköping near Stockholm, a public space. And I met this man on a conference. We went to, that's another story, but we went to all the conferences about plants anytime that there was one. So it was really a circle of people that grew and grew and grew. That was in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s.
Great.
But the book, the book we wrote the idea was in 1989. So the whole idea of what you see now started already
In 1989.
Yeah, maybe 28 years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You were ahead of your
Longer?
time.
Was
Yeah.
it 28? No.
89.
Yeah. No, 34.
35.
Yeah, 35.
Yeah.
Let's say, it's just
Yeah.
top it off.
No, it's 35. Because I came to New York in 1989. And I've been here for 35 years. So now we come to the High Line. after all that. As I mentioned before, Joel Sternfall's photographs were the first encounters that most New Yorkers had of the High Line. And these are the photos. Then they were incredibly beautiful for us to see this wild landscape within the city, which is something that we had never ever seen before. So I'm curious to know how you approached this project from the beginning. What was your initial reaction to the High Line? I've also read that the High Line was pivotal in the evolution of your work. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I had no idea. It was overwhelming. Not the beauty, but the place and that plants would grow wild there. And it's not that it was, in my way, beautiful. It was wild. And I thought, for me at that time, it was visiting the place for the first time in 2004. I think even the architects had no idea what to do with it. So I had to wait for their design before I could do anything. But I think the brief was that there should be at least 50% planting area. That was part of the wish of the neighborhood, the people involved in the committee and so on. So I think, and that's also why field operations got the commission to do it. But I had to wait, so I just was overwhelmed by the place and the location. But it looked, how would you say that? You see it, you take it in, but you don't do anything with it. You just wait what comes. But here it's happening. The moment it was all ready, you started to, so planting the garden being over at that time, for 10 days at that moment, for the planting time was exciting, of course. It was a lot of work, but the fact is, at that time already, I put every plant on paper. So I was designing, all my designs were you could carry or give over to somebody else, and you can see it is a sketch. That is how I start. I put together a sort of plant palette, and for where I work, I just put a plant palette together on a sheet of transparent paper, and from the list you see above, I start to sort of scrabble, how you call it, put them together in a sort of rhythm, and how I feel that it would work. And that's a start. But that came after many, many years that I couldn't go just over to places with just a load of plants and make gardens. I think at a certain point, working in public space, you have to put it on paper, you have to bring it into, people have to judge it. They are going to tell you what you can do and not do. They say they even have an opinion about your planting, because it doesn't matter whether they know about plants or planting, they have an opinion about what you do. And that still happens, There's always someone who said, oh, will that work or will it not work? And of course, sometimes things don't work, but that's not my thing. Is that there's so many circumstances that some plants don't work, where they work in another place rather well. But this is a sort of start of any garden place, any location I work on. And this is about the perennial gardens. We don't talk about trees and shrubs, which we also use. This is a sort of finalized plant with a legenda of the plants. And maybe you don't show that, but on every drawing I put the number of plants that will be in every specific group, or also at the individual plants.
Yeah, first of all, I want to say that these plants, these drawings are incredibly beautiful. I think they've been referred to as abstract art. And I think they reflect what some people say, you are a very visual thinker.
I am, yeah.
And thank you for sharing these drawings with us, because it really shows your process, and it's incredibly interesting.
No, I can see what I do. You know, when I put it on paper, I see a personality. If I put this yellow, I know it's a yarrow. I know how big it will become, how long it will flower, how it will look after flowering, how will, you know, how long it will live, whether it would love shade, drought, wet. So every particular plant gives me the whole story of what it could do for a place.
Yeah. And from drawing to
reality.
life.
Yeah.
So now we get this beautiful four-season garden, and I think it's the first time in a public park in New York we really get this concept of a garden being a year-round thing. And you very famously said that brown is also a color.
Well, yeah, of course, you know. Nobody denies that. Huh?
And I actually, so this just showing you some pictures of the High Line through the different seasons. And when I did my book, I photographed the High Line in the fall, and I thought about what you said, brown being a color. And so that's what I kind of try to capture.
I can imagine that you don't expect flowers in this time of the year, you know?
No.
It would look very strange if the
No.
plants will flower. Yeah, of course, in the plants that flower in the winter, but you know, this is...
The other thing that you taught us is the beauty, the sculptural quality of plants in the winter. So can you talk to us a little bit more about that? When you design the High Line, and how you picture the garden through the whole year?
It's complicated. Of course, you know the trees you choose, they have a certain character, they have a certain purpose, you know, they have a certain height, a certain life cycle. You know, you go from tall to mid-high to low, and so it's very complex, you know, because you know it, it's easy for you to do it, but not to explain it, you know, that is the whole point.
Yes, you're a visual thinker, so you can see it.
Yeah, but, and the same with every perennial you use, whether it's a grass or a flowering perennial, you know when it starts flowering, and sometimes what I said, even when you talk about peonies, it's not that you think about a flower, you think about how it emerges from the ground with its red tips already in very early spring, among other ground covers. That's also part of my thinking, of my consideration whether I use a plant or not.
Right.
So there's so many aspects that tell me, okay, I'm going to use that now. And there's a number of course, in public space, the palette of plants is very limited. You know, you cannot use plants that live only for 2 years. You have to use plants that have a character that is there for more than just the flowers. That I try to find plants that, of course, I use plants that if the first night frost comes, they collapse and they're gone. There are plants that you use in between other plants. They they fulfill another function, more as ground covering and just flower shortly. But the main plants that that show the character of a garden, they have more than just flowers. They have either good seed heads, they have a good winter structure. So that all together makes that a garden will work. And it not always work because of the plant itself, but how you put it together.
Right.
So it's all about size of the groups, rhythm, the repetition, a smaller group, a plant that comes out of another group, mixing two species, you know, it's a sort of juggling around with the knowledge and try to make it more complex than you ever, you make it more complex that you, no, every time you try to make it, you make it more complex than you did before.
Yes, yes. Well, you said something that was very interesting in that you are able to see, because of your deep knowledge of the plants, that you're able to visualize them, not just at one particular moment, but through its whole life cycle. And then to see in your mind a number of different plants all throughout the year and how they would be with each other and how, and I think that is your superpower.
Yeah, I think it's very simple, you know. That is the whole point. I have, of course, when I start, you know, I start with a garden. It doesn't matter how big it is. I always have a sort of starting problem, like most people, writers have that. So you have to start, and that's, you start very simple to say, okay, this is the site, this are the circumstances. You put together a list of plants that you can possibly use. So you put down 60, 70, sometimes 100 plants on you know, what you saw on the drawing, and that's where you pick from. So it's like a palette with colors, but that in the plant world, a color is not the thing. You know, it's more what that color does over time, over seasons. So, and that makes it so complex. But for me, it's so sort of becomes so much an intuitive thing, huh?
Yes.
I see the complexity. I see how complicated it is, how difficult it is, because I don't see other people doing it.
Right. No, you're completely right.
Some people do well, but
no,
I was gonna say, you know, you start off by saying, well, it's so simple, and I'm thinking to myself, then why doesn't it work out for me? Like I do this, I try to do this, and it doesn't work out. So it really is way more complicated, and the idea that you're thinking several years ahead of what it looks like.
Yeah, you think in life cycles more or less. You know, what is this?
Yeah.
You know, perennial gardens have a shorter life cycle than a tree. You know, when you plant an oak, you can go away and come back 100 years later, and you know that's still there. You don't even have to water it sometimes. So, but the other garden is you have to come back almost every day and to see what is happening, and also it is more dynamic. So you want to come back if it's right, and you want to see what happens, and you want to work in it to. Yeah, not only to stimulate it, but also to stimulate your own sort of senses. Huh?
Yeah.
Well, and Piet has also said that he doesn't like to grow a plant unless it looks good dead in its decayed
that's
form.
not true. No.
And he wants us to see the beauty in decay, and I think getting us to think so differently about the way we see gardens has been another really wonderful aspect of your design.
Yeah, but that was something that was quoted by the New York Times, but something that I did wrong myself, because I said it in a sort of during the interview, but I meant to say a plant is only worth using if it's looking good when it's going back to when it's going dormant. You know, that it's all about what is left of the plant, which is that, of course. But that's also material. It's I think also that by doing all this and looking at this, and I appreciated that, you also think without thinking about wildlife, about insects, about things that creatures that use that plant for their self. So there's another function for what we do, that is to create habitats for any creature, even for the creatures we don't like, mice and other things that. So, but it's a whole life. It's not only what. The more you do this, you realize it's not only for yourself. And the moment you realize that it's not for yourself, then you try to do it better and to keep it right and don't cut it back too early. That's why we leave it over the winter, and then. So, it's a lot more than just what you see.
So one of the things that I think was very novel when the Highline opened was this idea of ecological habitats. I think in 2009, the same year that the Highline opened, Eric Sanderson published a revelatory book called Mannahatta, and he gave us this picture of the island of Manhattan 400 years ago, which was what he called an ecological nirvana, with more ecological communities per acre than Yellowstone. So the High Line, even though it's not an ecological restoration project, it introduced us, it gave us an awareness for the first time in any public parks in New York City of this concept of ecological habitats. So can you talk a little bit more about that, what that means here on the High Line and how that fits into the narrative of the park?
I hope I understand it well, but gardening for me is about diversity. So it's sort of that plants feel good together, And there's a lot of been talked about natives and only natives, but I think a garden is just about plants that love each other, want to grow to each other, come from a similar habitat, and that creates more diversity, because we need the seasonality as well. And if you use plants only from, let's say, if you say we live in Europe, if we would use only European plants, then you would have a big lack of late flowering plants. And I think that's why we have so many North American plants in our system, in our plant system. The good thing is when I work here, most of the North American plants we know already. So we added a lot over the years. So many of the plants we do are about 70% North American natives. People don't realize them because many people don't even know them. That is also the kind. And we try to do that here. So what I said, to not only create this sort of habitats that work well, diversity that we need for all kinds of creatures, insects, and so on, but also that feeling that we need over the whole cycle of the year, that the garden moves, the dynamics and everything that you probably only feel and don't always see. And I think that is that enough? Or?
Yeah. I mean,
well, I just want to point out also that if you've walked the High Line, you know that it is a scripted journey, that you go from ecological habitats, and they're all designed to give you a different emotional experience. You go from the Gansevoort woodlands of the birch trees and the cover overhead into the grasslands, and then the wetlands of the bog planting just over here, and then the woodland edge, and you have these different experiences, and it creates a journey that really kind of moves you.
Yeah, but that was a big thing of the architects, field operations, that they created the narrative, because I had no idea what to do when I came here for the first time. I did the Lurie Garden in Chicago, which is a public park, but the approach was different. So here, by getting this narrative of the architect that said, okay, this is the park, this is the High Line, we start with woodlands. And then we slowly go over into half-open woodland, into meadow, into a nature preserve, and so on. And that gave me a sort of complete new idea how to design. So it was more not about sort of classical putting groups together, but working more with matrices, so with basic plantings where other plants would emerge from. And I think that, so the High Line was also a moment for me that I learned to work different and look at gardens more differently, more like landscapes instead of gardens. So this is maybe for me my first landscaped garden, or garden landscape instead of garden.
For me, I can tell you that to see the grassland in the middle of the city with the buildings in the background was one of the most extraordinary sights. An experience that, the High Line was one of the first to sort of give us these different landscapes that we had never ever seen before as city dwellers. And the next thing I think I want to talk to you about is trees. I think your work is mostly celebrated for perennials. You are...
Yeah, because they're more, let's say, they're photogenic, you know. And
Our trees are too.
now trees, they are on themselves, you know. As
Right.
an individual, you show an oak
Right.
on a picture, it's
Right.
great. When you show woodlands, often a lot of green. And you can, like here, you can create beautiful pictures, but it doesn't say, it's completely different. But every garden we make, we start with the trees and the shrubs. And if the garden is bigger, we have an area with a woodland area, but we also have a sort of more dynamic space with flowering plants and mainly a sort of grassland or meadow type of gardening, but it depends on the space, you know. A small garden can maybe have one big tree and a few shrubs, and that's what you do, and then you work with your underplanting, you maybe have a few perennials flowering in some corners, but every garden you try to find more than just direction, one or more ideas to fit in.
Right.
But trees, of course, I think of, when you have a garden, you think, oh, where? Okay, woodland, trees, that's the first thing you think about. So, but because the kind of gardens I make are so photogenic, everyone shows that. They hardly show, and you will see in my book, there's also woodland shown. Roof gardens we do a lot, you know, because, and so my work is from, let's say, from basically trees and shrubs, perennials, to everything that we see in gardens. But yeah, it's not, I'm not emphasizing what I do, you know, what I like most, but I like the knowledge of plants. Now Rick knows me, huh? I know more than just perennials. Yeah.
Well, I just want to say that your use of sumac on the High Line is...
Was a request of the architect, of the landscape architect, you know, and...
But you place them among the perennials in such a way that emphasizes their sculptural quality. It's a plant, it's a native plant that we see on roadsides here, but not in gardens. And so to see them in this context, I think you've sort of brought out the beauty in them, and now they're being used more in gardens. I mean, this is the kind of influence that you've had.
I don't know, but...
Well, it's true.
The fact is that, of course, Jim Corner had a request. He wanted to use sumac, you know, and that it was the right place, you know, this more native area. So we put some in, and then the rest was all native. So it felt like a sort of American native planting in the right place. So they were on the right place, but you have to maintain them. So when I make gardens, also think about the gardeners that have to maintain it, but it doesn't always work. No?
Yeah. And honestly, I think some of you who design gardens will agree that the best garden designer are the people that know how to maintain the plants that they're designing with. Because you have to know where it's going to go, and that's the beauty of, we did it today in some of the gardens. Pete helped us consult today with, and saying like, I can see where this is going, I can see how this is going to grow in, I can see that this plant doesn't belong in this plant community, and they're not plant communities,
anymore, yeah?
But in his mind they are, and that's one of the aspects of the design that I find so interesting. You understand the gestalt of how all of the plants kind of fit together in a certain style.
What I do, you saw it this morning, I said this plant doesn't belong in the community, but it looks so good here, so let's do it. It feels like it should be here.
But another tree that I want to talk about is the amelanchier, which I think since you've used it here on the High Line, I keep seeing it popping up in other places. This is another example of how you've popularized a plant. And the amelanchier in particular, for me, is very special because its common name is serviceberry, and in the Northeast, when the serviceberries are in bloom, that means that the ground has thawed enough to bury the dead. And the other thing is, you, during one of your early talks around the High Line, said that, oh, you can eat the berries. And that's an extraordinary thing to tell a New Yorker, that you can actually eat something from a tree. And I found that actually it's really rich in calcium and fiber and iron. So it's a fantastic tree.
Yeah, but the birds knew that already. So.
Yeah.
And the last time Piet visited, we actually had a bowl of service berries that he enjoyed with his very tart European yogurt. And then we had a staff member. Every year now we have service berry pie. Yes. Well, you have to come back in June if you want that.
Anyway, so see, these are some of the pictures of the sumac in the fall, which has fantastic colors and like a beautiful fruit as well. Yeah, you can. It's a spice you can use. And there's the amalanke with the berries. So, as James Corner said, you work with a lot of people to make these landscapes: architects, plant nurseries, soil specialists, ecologists, and gardeners. And it's a huge collaborative effort. And stewardship is crucial. And in an interview with Margaret Roach, she pointed out that if we don't have the right people to take care of the garden would disappear in a few years' time. So with that in mind, can you talk about your work with the horticultural team here at the Highline?
In general, I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think you lose your garden if it's not taken care of, within 2 years. Everything is, gone except maybe the trees and shrubs you planted. But I think you make a garden and it's not, it costs a lot of money, and it's not about the money, but it's about you want to put something in for a future relationship with the public and the purpose you do it for. So. Gardens are important, and some people don't understand how important they are, and they neglect them, especially in public space. They are made, they cost a lot of money, and then they are gone. I've seen so many gardens go because of neglectancy, and they put more money in it, they recreate them, but it never will happen. And I said, I can only do my work if it is taken over by the right people that feel what it needs to continue, that, to, how do you say that, to continue what I started. Because I put down just a basis for the future, it's all what you put in is something that is sometimes just a promise, yeah? But the promise cannot go through if you don't have the right people that that make that promise come true. And you see here, and you see the love for plants people have. Gardens bring people together, not only together, but it's also a very social aspect in people's life. You meet people with the same interest. It is you meet them on times that it's always different. It's not that you go to the same place with the same people, but you come to a place where it's certainly different than 3 weeks ago. So it has so much more, and it's not that I'm an advocate for that I say that it's only happening with gardens, but gardens is a good example. Yeah?
Yes.
Well, and I'll just add that Piet's gardens are very complex, and they're dynamic in the sense that they're continuing to evolve. You start with a very simple planting, and some things seed around, and you get ideas from that. But as wonderfully naturalistic and carefree as the Highline looks, and as Piet's gardens look, it takes a tremendous amount of curation to get them to look that way. I say it's like the swan swimming on the water, and everything looks so calm, but underneath those little feet are paddling so fast. And we're so lucky to have Piet coming back to work with us every couple of years now to help us guide how the garden wants to be, and to say, we decided today to take out some very big shrubs in the Washington grasslands because they've just gotten too big. And so that creates a whole opportunity to bring some grasses back and to restore it back to something. So it's constant, isn't it? This idea of kind of the evolution, and you're seeing where the garden wants to go.
Yeah, because the fact is that if you look back to the original design, you would find nothing that is only some trees that are on the same place, but the plants are moving. We have to take plants out because trees become too big, give too much pressure, take too much water from the plants that were placed in the beginning. So we have to change plants underneath, and that happens all the time. So but you say a garden is a continuous process into the future, but at the end it counts that the plants feel happy, and if they don't feel happy, you change them for plants that will feel happy. I think that is what we talk about all the time. And we talk about plants that see themselves in places where you don't want them, so we need to tell people why they should take them out. Otherwise you lose the sort of depth of your planting, you lose the transparency, you lose the sort of you lose the image. It's like a picture you take, and then suddenly someone is putting all kinds of things on top of the good picture and says, okay, what do you think about it now? Huh? But it is a continuous struggle and positive struggle to keep it right and to keep it in but you need good hands. So my work, always say, depend 100% and more on the people that take care. And the people that take care need to know their plants. At least they need to want to learn about plants.
Right.
And this may be a good spot to get some questions from the audience.
Yes.
Alan, do you have?
Yes. So we're going to do first of all, thank you.
Yes. What a great conversation, huh?
It's both instructive and a meditation at the same time, so thank you so much, both of you, for really what a wonderful conversation for us to be present for. Why don't we open up our questions first to one of our teen fellows in our Emerging Leaders program. We have several tracks, and we had a group of emerging leaders who were working in horticulture this past year. And learning the gardens and working with our horticultural staff. So is there someone who has a question?
Over
Please.
Here. I wanted to know, how has your childhood shaped your relationship to plants and how you approach designing your landscapes?
To be honest, my childhood was living, my parents had a restaurant and bar. That's how I grew up. So plants were, never thought about plants, I never.
So how did you start thinking about plants?
No, I was in my 20s when I started to think about the rest of my life. And think, shall I do this all my life? And the good thing is that my wife was working, and I could escape and tried several jobs until I came to work in a garden center at Christmas time to sell Christmas trees. And they wanted to keep me, a little bit longer, but because I probably had a good sort of spirit, work ethos, and I think, can you stay a little bit longer? So I started to work in the perennial department just to make the efficiency on plants and just to make them ready for municipalities and so on. And that, they said you could stay here for a month and then it's over, then we go into another, and then at the end, they said, can you stay? Because we need someone in the nursery just to hoe, because the weeds are growing. And I said, okay. So, and then my first question was, one of the questions was, what is this? And what is the name of that? And nobody knew that, so I bought a book with pictures of trees and shrubs. So I learned myself a little bit, this is a conifer, this is a juniperus, okay, that should be a Paulonia, all these things. And then I started to order a tree, And I had no garden, so I planted it in my mother's garden. So, and I ordered another tree and a shrub and another plant, and then now that is how it all started. So it is that it's not that you have to be grown up with plants. It is more that it has to. There should be a moment that brings it up. You know, you probably had it all the time, but you know, you didn't know that.
Thank you. We have the best horticultural staff, I think, you know, in the business. They are just absolutely excellent. And I would love to give one of them an opportunity to ask Piet a question. Yes, you could applaud the horticultural staff. Yes. Yes, I mean, they're terrific.
Hi again, Piet. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how your design style has evolved through the years.
Good question. It evolves. You learn every year, you know. You learned. My style became wilder and wilder, but it's more that you have to control your. It is. Of course, from the beginning, you made a sort of simple planting, which we call a block planting, a nice group of this, a nice group of that, a nice group of that, and that was a good combination. And when you did it right, it looked good. And then you start to think about other things, spontaneity. So in the groups, you put something that randomly that suddenly comes up as being seeded or something like that, and that is, and that goes on and on. So at a certain moment, you know so much how to do it that you start to sort of, yeah, mix. Let's say we have matrix plantings, which you know, and we have block plantings. So I started to mix them. So I had gardens where the matrix flows into the block planting and so on. So you become very creative with all the little things of garden design. So you can mix them, you can separate them, you can interfere them. So it's playing around with what you know, and that is. And when I just tell that, it doesn't say that you know how I do it, because it is more that a lot of things it's a sort of creative process where it's in your head, and it works when you're busy. But if you say make a block planting, I can do that. Make a matrix, make a woodland, make a this. But while I do that, I get these ideas that I should interfere with this kind of idea, you know, and that is the complexity. That makes it so complex.
When you're thinking about the garden and our gardens here, do you think for a moment when you were designing them, when someone's walking through them, I want them to feel a certain way? And did you think that? And if so, what was the feeling you wanted people to have? Because more often than not, I say, what do you love about the High Line? They say, it's not what I like, it's a thing, it's how it makes me feel. So you've helped to curate that comment from our visitors. So what did you want them to feel when they came up here?
Let's say when I design a garden, when I do the master planning, so I want people to be in the garden as long as possible. So my paths are winding and going around, and so I try to keep people in the garden so that they follow a road with different experiences. And while at the same time people not always feel that they come in another area, they feel it. You know, for me, gardening is also not what you see, but what you feel in between. So I don't know the English word for it. Overgang. What is that? Overgangen?
Transition.
The transitions, you know, in gardening. That is also very important, that people feel something. There's another area, but they can really say what it is. And that's what you try to do. And if it happens, it's magic. But, you know.
I think you've created the magic. Let's take a question from an audience member. Yes. Hi. Do you want to?
Julie Hatterer, volunteer, Hort volunteer with Allende. It's fabulous. So my question apropos of what you were just talking about was whether you've ever been involved in designing a therapeutic garden, as in therapeutic horticulture. Is that something that you've done either in hospital settings or
I think a good garden is therapeutic. So,
I knew you were going to say that.
And why do you ask
but
it?
there are specific, about
yeah, most
therapeutic-
gardens should be that.
Yeah.
They are that. You know, we've done
Right.
gardens at hospitals because they ask for a garden around you know, where people are in
So you have,
in
okay.
the room. So of course, but in general, everything you do with gardening should be therapeutic, or help people to think about, you know, or feel good. Feel good, that's a good thing to say. And when you feel good, you heal easier, and or also mentally, I think.
Well, and Piet also said to me today, he gets asked to do a lot of private gardens, and you weren't so interested in having private gardens because you like people to enjoy, you're interested in getting people into them, right?
No, I say private gardens, we did a lot. Sometimes, I still do private gardens, but you know, you do that for a few people, you know, and what is better than if you have the choice to do it for a family with maybe 2 or 3 children and their relatives, or you do it for 1 million people. You know, if you have the choice, you rather do it for 1 million people. Only the risk is higher. That is the only. More critics, you know. and when you have a family, they probably say, okay, I don't like that plant. Then they say, oh, we replace that, you know. Or a plant dies, they say, and people are happy because they can go to the garden center to buy a new one. So there's a big difference in how people, look at gardens. You know, for in a public space, there's a higher risk. There's a lot of stress by people on the gardens. In a private garden, people, if they really like gardening, they keep it. You know, how would you say? They take care of themselves and they're happy. And what I say, sometimes they're very happy that some plants die because they can replace them, and they have the fun of replacing them. But when a few plants die in a public space, it can be a hole for a long time. If you don't have the right people that notice it, it will be a gap, and a bigger gap, and a nasty place. So, but one more thing about public gardens. I started with public gardens in the 1996 was my first public garden in Sweden. And that not many people, garden designers, did that. So people with the big plant knowledge, like we have them in England, we probably know Tom Stewart-Smith and Dan Pearce and all this, they kept in the private garden for a long, long time. So their work was never shown in public. So the advantage of that people know my work is because I worked in public with a skill that was not used in public gardens.
Well, I'm thankful that you choose to work in public gardens.
Yeah.
Because we get to enjoy your work.
That's true.
I have a question here, and then we have right here.
Hi. Over here. I was wondering if you could talk more about how you take inspiration from wild nature spaces and apply it to the garden setting.
Oh, that goes automatically. You know, it's more that you take it in and you bring it out. So it's more that you see it, you take it in with, you know, you think it's beautiful, and, you know, that it's more what you see in this whole of the entourage, you know, let's say the picture you feel or you see, you try to translate that into the gardens. You know, you see a picture which has this sort of diversity, the beauty, and that's what you try to bring into your work in gardens. So it's hard to explain, you know, you can't even describe it.
Yeah, I see somebody, the microphone here. Yep.
My question is, how did you come to the attention of Dillis Scofidio and field operations?
I don't know, they found me. I think that, yeah, but maybe because at that time I was busy on the battery park. I think people knew about me, that's also, and I know that in offices, landscape offices, they always ask, who can we take for the planting? And I think that is part of it. So they needed a horticulturalist, you know, not a designer, to be honest, because they were the designers and I was someone that knew about plants. So you can see that many landscape architects have no idea that if you know plants that you can design.
I see Barbara over here for, I think, the last question.
Say that a garden reaches its maturity after about 14 years. Do you believe that? And if you do, would you say that the High Line is now in its prime?
No, I think maturity depends on where you look at, you know. A perennial planting could be mature in 2-3 years, you know, more or less. And then it closes and closes, and you have to already start with making little changes, interventions. So, and after 15 years, that's what they say, it's a lifespan of a perennial planting. You know, the lifespan. In fact, it should be over at that time. You should redo that. But we've noticed that in gardens we did that after 20 years, they still can look good with the right people around it. So every year you make small interventions or bigger interventions so that extend the lifetime, the shelf life of a perennial garden, yeah. But it is, I call my work ephemeral, you know, not because it is for a particular time.
Thank you.
That's true. You can't have it forever.
I want to, let's give Piet a big round of applause. And thank you, Ngoc, for being here with us and for guiding this conversation. And Richard, just a quick moment. Can every one of our horticulturalists stand up, please? Rain, snow, hot, cold, they're here every day. I also want to ask another thing. If you volunteer at the High Line, could you please stand up as a volunteer or a docent at the High Line? Please stand up. This is a public space that was built by New Yorkers for New Yorkers and is kept alive, thriving, growing because of New Yorkers and the folks that are here tonight. Nearly 100% of our operating budget all comes from donations and philanthropy, not the city of New York. There's not a single New York City public employee that is on the High Line. The deal we have with the city is they own the park, we have to pay for its operations, and it could not be done without all of you, and it could not be done without the volunteers, our amazing docents, our incredible horticulturalists, and a cast of characters both in the front of the house and in the back of the house that keep this place running. And it is an unbelievable piece of New York City magic. And I want to thank all of you for being part of it on our 15th birthday. Thank you so much and have a good evening.